The research ship Meridian floated in the darkness between stars like a metal island in an ocean of space. Dr. Elena Rodriguez walked through the narrow hallways, checking on her team of scientists who had been working for 3 days straight without proper sleep. The alien artifacts they found on the dead planet below were unlike anything humans had ever seen before, and Elena knew they were close to something big. Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat at his communication station in the main control room listening to the usual static and background noise of empty space when something changed. The sound was different, and it made his skin crawl in a way he could not explain. He adjusted his headset and turned up the volume as Captain Lisa Hammond entered the room carrying her morning coffee. Jake looked up at her with wide eyes and said the signal was not random noise, but seemed to have a pattern like someone was trying to talk. Captain Hammond set down her coffee and moved to stand behind Jake as he played back the recording. The sounds were strange and musical, but there was definitely intelligence behind them. Commander Ryan Davis heard the commotion and joined them at the communication station with his usual frown of worry. He did not like surprises, and this felt like the kind of surprise that could get them all killed. Elena arrived just as Jake managed to clean up the signal enough to hear it clearly, and what they heard made everyone in the room go silent. The voice was speaking in perfect English and asking for peaceful contact with the humans aboard the ship called Meridian. Captain Hammond felt her heart race as she realized they were dealing with first contact with an alien species that somehow knew their language and their ship name. She ordered Jake to respond using standard first contact protocols while Commander Davis immediately started security scans of the surrounding space. Elena grabbed the nearest chair and sat down hard as the reality of the situation hit her. After years of studying dead alien artifacts, they were about to meet living aliens who wanted to talk. The response came back within minutes, and the voice introduced itself as Ambassador Zthri of the Valian Collective. He explained that his people had been watching human expansion through the galaxy and needed to speak with them about a matter of great importance. Captain Hammond authorized full first contact procedures despite Commander Davis warning her about the security risks of allowing unknown aliens near their ship. The tactical officer pointed out that any species advanced enough to track them and learn their language probably had weapons that could destroy them easily. Elena and her team quickly prepared the main conference room while Jake worked to establish better communication with the alien ship that had appeared on their sensors like a ghost. The vessel was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, with smooth crystal surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. Blue energy flowed through channels in the hull like glowing blood through veins, and Elena wondered what kind of technology could create something so elegant yet clearly powerful. Ambassador Zthri appeared in their conference room through some kind of advanced projection that made him look solid and real, even though Elena knew he was still on his own ship. The alien was tall and graceful, with skin that looked like frosted glass and eyes that changed color as he spoke. He had 4 arms that moved with fluid precision, and his voice carried harmonics that made Elena think of music played on instruments that did not exist. The ambassador began by apologizing for the dramatic nature of their meeting, but explained that time was running short. His people called themselves the Valian Collective, and they had been fleeing through the galaxy for hundreds of years from something they called the Devourers. Elena leaned forward in her chair as Zthri described creatures that consumed entire star systems and left nothing behind but empty space where planets and suns used to exist. The Valians had technology far beyond anything humans possessed, including the ability to manipulate energy and matter at the atomic level, but even they could not stop the Devourers. Commander Davis interrupted to ask why the Valians were telling them this and what they wanted from humanity. Zthri's eyes shifted to a deep purple color that Elena somehow knew meant sadness, as he explained that the Devourers had found their current hiding place and would arrive soon. The Valians had studied many species during their long flight, and humans were the only ones who showed the kind of unpredictable creativity that might be able to help them find a solution. Captain Hammond asked how much time they had, and the answer made everyone in the room feel cold. The long-range sensors aboard the Meridian suddenly started screaming warnings as massive energy signatures appeared at the edge of their star system. Elena watched the display screen show readings that made no sense as something huge and dark began moving toward them faster than any ship should be able to travel. Zthri looked at the readings and his skin became completely transparent as he whispered that the Devourers had found them and there was nowhere left to run. Commander Ryan Davis ran to the tactical station as alarms began blaring throughout the ship, and his fingers flew over the controls as he tried to make sense of what the sensors were showing him. The energy signatures were unlike anything in human databases, and they were moving in patterns that defied physics as he understood it. Captain Hammond ordered all hands to battle stations, while she opened communication channels to the human colonies scattered throughout the system. The first reports that came back made her blood run cold as outer monitoring stations simply stopped responding one by one without any distress calls or signs of battle. Elena watched the main display screen show a map of their solar system with red dots marking where human settlements had been just hours before, and now those dots were turning black as something erased them from existence. Ambassador Zthri moved closer to the display, and his forearms gestured in complex patterns as he shared more information about what they were facing. The Devourers were not just destroying planets and stations, but were somehow removing them from reality itself as if they had never existed at all. Elena felt sick as she realized that entire families and communities were not just dying, but were being wiped from the universe completely. Jake Morrison worked frantically at his communication station trying to reach anyone who might still be alive in the outer system, while streams of evacuation requests flooded in from colonies that could see the darkness approaching. The problem was that normal space travel was too slow, and the Devourers were moving faster than any human ship could escape. Elena suggested they ask the Valians for help evacuating civilians, and Zthri immediately agreed, saying his people had ships positioned throughout the system that could assist with rescue operations. Commander Davis coordinated the evacuation efforts while studying the tactical data that was coming in from automated probes sent to observe the Devourers. The images they transmitted back before being consumed showed something that looked like tears in space, itself moving through the void and consuming everything they touched. Elena watched the recordings with growing horror as she saw entire moons simply disappear as if someone had erased them from a photograph. The Devourers left behind regions where even light could not exist, and looking at those empty spaces made her feel dizzy and afraid. Zthri offered to share more detailed information about the enemy through a process called memory transfer that would allow Elena and her team to experience Valian encounters with the Devourers firsthand. Elena agreed despite Commander Davis warning her about the risks of allowing alien technology to interface with human minds. The process involved placing her hand on a crystal device that felt warm and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Suddenly, Elena was experiencing memories that were not her own as she saw through Valian eyes the first encounter with the Devourers centuries ago. The shared memories showed her a thriving Valian world with crystal cities that stretched into the sky and oceans that sparkled with bioluminescent life. Then the Devourers came, and Elena watched in horror as reality itself began to unravel around the planet. The Valians tried to fight using weapons that could reshape matter and energy, but nothing they did had any effect on the creatures that seemed to exist partially outside normal space and time. Elena experienced the terror and helplessness of the Valian survivors as they fled their dying world, knowing they might be the last of their kind. Captain Hammond received new orders from Earth Command telling her to withdraw all forces to the core systems and abandon the outer colonies to their fate. She stared at the message for a long time before calling a meeting with her senior officers and the Valian ambassador. The room was tense as she explained that Earth Command believed the threat was too great and that humanity should focus on defending the most important worlds rather than trying to save everyone. Commander Davis supported the withdrawal, saying it was their duty to follow orders and preserve what they could. Elena argued that abandoning millions of people was not just wrong but also pointless because the Devourers would eventually reach Earth anyway, Zthri confirmed Elena's fears by explaining that his people had tried the strategy of retreat many times, and it never worked because the Devourers always found them eventually. The creatures seemed to be guided by some kind of collective intelligence that could track fleeing populations across vast distances, and there was nowhere in the galaxy that would be safe for long. Elena asked if the Valians had any ideas for fighting back, and the ambassador's eyes changed to a color she had never seen before as he described a desperate plan that his people had been working on for decades. The Valians had discovered that the Devourers could be disrupted by a weapon that attacked the fabric of reality itself, but the device required a living being to serve as a conduit for the massive energies involved. The process would allow them to create a disruption wave that could potentially destroy the Devourers, but the person serving as the conduit would not survive the experience. Elena felt her heart race as she realized what Zthri was suggesting, and Commander Davis immediately objected, saying they could not ask anyone to sacrifice themselves based on alien theories that might not even work. Strange things began happening throughout the ship as the Devourer scouts came closer to their position, and Elena noticed that time seemed to move differently in some parts of the vessel. Jake reported that his chronometer was running slow, while other crew members complained that they felt like they were moving through thick liquid when they tried to walk down certain hallways. The artificial gravity fluctuated randomly, and several people reported having vivid nightmares about endless darkness consuming all the stars in the sky. Elena realized that the Devourers were already affecting their reality just by being in the same solar system, and she wondered how much worse it would get when the main force arrived. Elena stood up from the conference table and looked directly at Ambassador Zthri as she volunteered to be the conduit for the experimental weapon that might be their only hope against the Devourers. The room erupted in arguments as Jake Morrison immediately protested, saying there had to be another way and that she was too valuable to lose. Commander Davis pointed out that they still had orders to withdraw to the core systems, and that one person's sacrifice would not change the overall strategic situation. Captain Hammond felt torn between her duty to follow orders and her growing understanding that retreat would only delay the inevitable destruction of humanity. Elena explained her reasoning in simple terms that everyone could understand, saying that she had spent her entire career studying alien life and technology so that humanity could better understand the universe around them. Now she had the chance to use that knowledge to protect not just her own species but also the Valians, and potentially other civilizations that the Devourers might encounter in the future. She pointed out that the weapon was theoretical and might not work at all, but doing nothing was guaranteed to result in everyone dying anyway. Jake argued that there had to be scientists and engineers who could find a better solution if they just had more time, but Elena reminded him that time was the one thing they did not have. Dr. Amy Foster arrived at the meeting after being called to provide medical expertise about the conduit process, and her examination of the Valian data made her face go pale. The procedure would require the volunteer to remain conscious while massive amounts of energy flowed through their nervous system, and the readings showed that no living being could survive that level of stress for more than a few minutes. Elena asked if those few minutes would be enough to power the weapon, and Amy confirmed that according to the calculations it should be sufficient if everything worked perfectly. The problem was that there were so many unknowns that the chances of success seemed impossibly small. Engineer Marcus Chun joined the discussion after spending hours studying Valian technology alongside their technical specialists, and his findings surprised everyone in the room. Human neural patterns were apparently unique in the galaxy because of their chaotic and unpredictable nature, which made them ideal for interfacing with the reality manipulation technology that powered the weapon. Marcus explained that most alien species, including the Valians, had evolved towards stability and predictability in their thinking patterns, which made them poorly suited for the kind of reality distortion required to fight the Devourers. Elena felt a strange mix of pride and terror as she learned that humanity's tendency toward chaos and creativity was exactly what made them valuable allies in this desperate situation. Zthri confirmed that his people had studied hundreds of species during their long flight from the Devourers, and none of them showed the same combination of adaptability and stubborn determination that humans possessed. The ambassador's eyes shifted to what Elena had learned was their color for admiration mixed with fear, as he called humans the wildcard species of the galaxy. Commander Davis reluctantly agreed to delay their withdrawal while the weapon was being constructed, but he insisted on maintaining defensive positions and preparing for evacuation if the plan failed. Captain Hammond authorized the project, despite knowing that she was probably ending her career by disobeying direct orders from Earth Command. Elena began the preparation process immediately, while Marcus worked with Valian engineers to adapt their technology for human use. The weapon itself was being built in the ship's main cargo bay and looked like a massive crystal formation, surrounded by energy conduits that hummed with barely contained power. Pilot Sarah Blake volunteered to lead reconnaissance missions against the Devourer scouts that were probing the system's defenses, and her reports confirmed everyone's worst fears about what they were facing. The creatures moved through space in ways that violated every law of physics and seemed to exist partially in normal reality and partially in some other dimension that human science could not explain. Sarah described watching a small moon simply cease to exist as a scout passed through its location, leaving behind empty space that hurt to look at directly. Jake worked around the clock to maintain communication with the scattered human and Valian forces throughout the system while coordinating rescue operations for civilians who were still trapped in the outer colonies. The refugee ships brought back survivors who told horrible stories about reality breaking down around them as the Devourers approached. Some people reported seeing their friends and family members fade away like ghosts, while others described time moving backward or forward randomly. As space itself became unstable, Elena underwent the first phase of conditioning required to interface with the weapon and discovered that the process was more painful than she had expected as alien technology began mapping her neural patterns. Dr. Foster monitored her vital signs while Valian medical specialists guided the procedure using techniques that had been developed over centuries of desperate research. Elena tried to stay focused on why she was doing this, but the pain made it difficult to think clearly, and she began to understand why the Valians called the process the ultimate sacrifice. The main Devourer force finally appeared at the edge of the solar system, and the sight of it on the display screens made everyone in the control room fall silent. The entity was massive beyond comprehension and seemed to be made of darkness that moved and writhed like a living thing. Elena watched in horror as stars began to flicker and go out as the creature approached, and she realized that their enemy was not just destroying matter, but was actually unmaking the fabric of reality itself. Commander Davis reported that the thing's presence was causing gravitational anomalies throughout the system and that several planets were beginning to experience temporal distortions. Captain Hammond received a final communication from Earth Command ordering her to withdraw immediately. But she made the decision to ignore the order and stand with the Valians against an enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. Elena felt proud of her captain's courage even as she prepared for a procedure that would almost certainly kill her, and she hoped that her sacrifice would mean something in the battle against creatures that represented the ultimate enemy of all existence. The construction of the reality disruptor weapon continued around the clock as human engineers and Valian technicians worked together in ways that neither species had ever attempted before. Marcus Chen found himself amazed by how quickly the two groups learned to communicate despite vast differences in their technology and thinking patterns. The Valians approached problems with elegant precision, while humans preferred creative solutions that often seemed chaotic but somehow worked. Anyway, Elena watched the team's work from her preparation chamber, where she was undergoing the painful process of neural mapping that would allow her to control the weapon. Dr. Amy Foster monitored Elena's vital signs as the alien technology gradually integrated with her nervous system, and the readings showed stress levels that would have killed most people within hours. Elena remained conscious through sheer determination, while her brain patterns were slowly synchronized with the weapon's control systems. The process felt like having her thoughts pulled apart and rebuilt piece by piece, but she forced herself to focus on the faces of the people she was trying to protect. Jake Morrison visited whenever he could spare time from his communication duties, and his presence helped her stay connected to her humanity during the most difficult parts of the procedure. Commander Davis organized the defense of the construction site as reports came in from throughout the system showing that the Devourer scouts were becoming more aggressive in their attacks. The battles were unlike anything human military doctrine had prepared them for because conventional weapons simply passed through the creatures without causing any damage. The Valians had developed energy manipulation techniques that could sometimes disrupt the scouts, but even their advanced technology was only marginally effective against enemies that existed partially outside normal reality. Marcus made a crucial discovery while analyzing the weapon's power requirements and realized that the device would need more than just Elena's life force to function properly. The reality disruptor required an emotional connection to what was being protected, and the strength of that connection would determine how effective the weapon would be against the Devourers. This meant that Elena would need to maintain her love for humanity and her determination to protect them even while massive amounts of energy flowed through her body. Marcus began modifying the weapon to amplify these emotional signals and channel them into the destructive beam. The presence of the main Devourer force continued to warp reality throughout the solar system as planets experienced random time distortions, and several stars began aging rapidly or reverting to earlier stages of their development. Elena could feel the creature's influence even inside the shielded preparation chamber, and she began having dreams where she walked through empty space that had once contained entire worlds. The nightmares were so vivid that she sometimes woke up unsure whether she was still dreaming or if reality itself was becoming unstable around her. Sarah Blake led increasingly desperate raids against the Devourer scouts using hit-and-run tactics that relied on speed and unpredictability to avoid being consumed. Her pilot skills were pushed to their limits as she navigated through regions of space where the laws of physics changed randomly and where time could flow backward without warning. The reconnaissance data she gathered showed that the creatures were testing human and Valian defenses while slowly surrounding the system to prevent any escape. Elena realized that retreat was no longer an option, even if Captain Hammond changed her mind about following Earth Command's orders. Dr. Foster developed mental conditioning techniques to help both human and Valian personnel resist the psychological effects of prolonged exposure to the Devourers, and her methods proved surprisingly effective. The aliens had relied on meditation and mental discipline to protect their minds, but humans used different approaches based on stubborn determination and emotional resilience. Elena found that thinking about her family and friends gave her strength, while remembering Earth's blue skies and green forests helped her maintain hope even in the face of cosmic horror. Jake established a psychic communication link with Elena through the Valian network that allowed him to serve as her anchor to humanity during the final stages of preparation. The connection was initially uncomfortable for both of them as their minds touched in ways that evolution had never intended, but they learned to use the link to share strength and determination. Elena could feel Jake's fear for her safety, but also his pride in her courage and his unwavering belief that their plan would succeed. The emotional support helped her endure pain levels that should have driven her unconscious while maintaining the mental clarity needed to control the weapon. The weapon itself grew larger and more complex as additional components were added to handle the massive energy flows required to disrupt reality on a cosmic scale. The crystal formations pulsed with contained power that made the air around them shimmer, and Elena could feel its influence even from her shielded chamber. Marcus worked frantically to ensure that the device would remain stable when activated, because an uncontrolled release of that much energy could tear apart their entire solar system. The margin for error was essentially zero, and everyone involved knew that they would only get one chance to make the weapon work. Ambassador Zthri revealed the final component of their desperate plan as the main Devourer force approached the inner system, and Elena learned that timing would be even more critical than they had realized. The weapon could only affect the creatures when they were fully manifested in normal reality, which meant waiting until the enemy was close enough to begin actively consuming planets and stars. Elena would have to maintain consciousness and control while the most powerful Devourer entity came close enough to threaten everything she cared about, and the psychological pressure of that knowledge was almost overwhelming. The part ended with long-range sensors detecting something far larger than any previous Devourer entity approaching from the outer system, and Zthri identified it as a prime Devourer capable of consuming entire star systems within minutes. Elena felt a chill of absolute terror as she realized that her sacrifice would determine whether humanity and the Valians survived or joined the countless civilizations that had already been erased from existence, and she wondered if her determination would be enough to face something that represented the end of everything. The approach of the Prime Devourer caused reality distortions that affected the entire solar system as planets began experiencing time loops that lasted for hours before snapping back to normal time flow. Elena watched the monitoring displays from her position in the weapons control chamber and saw readings that made no scientific sense as stars aged decades in minutes or suddenly reverted to their youth. The massive creature's presence warped space itself, and several of the outer planets simply disappeared for brief periods before reappearing in slightly different positions. Marcus Chen worked desperately to keep the reality disruptor stable as the cosmic distortions threatened to tear apart the delicate energy patterns that made the weapon possible. Elena felt the full integration process reach its final stage as her consciousness expanded beyond her physical body and began to merge with the weapon's control systems. The experience was terrifying and wonderful at the same time, as she suddenly could perceive reality on a scale that human minds were never meant to comprehend. She could see the Devourers for what they truly were, creatures from a parallel dimension, where entropy had achieved perfect victory and nothing existed except endless emptiness. They were trying to transform all realities into copies of their own dead universe, and Elena understood that this battle was not just about survival, but about the fundamental nature of existence itself. Captain Hammond coordinated the final battle plan using a combination of human tactical flexibility and Valian precision that maximized their limited advantages against an enemy that was essentially invincible through conventional means. The strategy involved using the combined human and Valian fleet as a decoy to draw the Prime Devourer into position while the reality disruptor charged to full power. Elena would have only one chance to fire the weapon at the exact moment when the creature was fully manifested in their dimension and vulnerable to the disruptor's effects. Jake Morrison maintained his psychic link with Elena through the Valian communication network and served as her connection to humanity, while cosmic energies flowed through her body at levels that would have instantly killed anyone else. Elena could feel her physical form beginning to break down under the stress, but Jake's presence in her mind gave her the strength to maintain consciousness and control. She drew on memories of Earth's beauty and the faces of everyone she was fighting to protect while the weapon's power built toward the critical threshold needed to wound something that existed beyond normal space and time. The Prime Devourer manifested as a writhing mass of absolute darkness that seemed to absorb light itself, creating a growing sphere of nothingness in the center of their solar system. Elena watched through the weapon's senses as the creature's presence caused several smaller ships to simply cease existing without any explosion or debris left behind. Traditional weapons passed through the entity harmlessly while its influence spread outward, causing reality to become unstable in an ever-widening circle. Commander Davis coordinated desperate holding actions as human and Valian forces tried to buy time for the weapon to reach full charge. Marcus discovered that the reality disruptor was drawing power not just from Elena, but from the collective will and determination of every human and Valian in the vicinity who refused to give up hope in the face of ultimate darkness. The weapon was feeding on their combined refusal to accept defeat and their shared determination to protect what they loved. Elena could feel the emotional energy flowing into the device and realized that she was not making this sacrifice alone, but was being supported by everyone who had chosen to stand and fight rather than flee from the approaching horror. Ambassador Zthri revealed that the weapon had to be fired at the precise moment when the Prime Devourer was fully committed to consuming their reality, because that would be the only time when it could be damaged by forces from their dimension. The timing required would be measured in fractions of seconds, and Elena would have to make the decision while under unimaginable stress, as the creature's presence threatened to drive her insane. The ambassador's eyes shifted to colors she had never seen before as he expressed both admiration and terror at the burden she was accepting on behalf of all life in their galaxy. Sarah Blake led the final diversionary attacks against the Prime Devourer, using maneuvers that pushed both human technology and pilot skill beyond their normal limits. The creature's attention focused on the fleet as it began actively consuming ships, and Elena felt sick watching brave people disappear from existence to give her the chance she needed. The entity's hunger was endless and alien, but she could sense a kind of intelligence behind its actions that was calculating and patient. It knew that the humans and Valians were planning something, but seemed confident that no force from their reality could threaten something that existed primarily in the realm of pure entropy. Elena made the decision to push the reality disruptor beyond its safe operating parameters as the Prime Devourer reached the optimal position for her attack. Marcus tried to warn her about the dangers of overloading the weapon, but she knew that a normal power level would not be enough to destroy something so fundamentally hostile to their existence. The pain of channeling that much energy was beyond description, but Elena focused on her love for humanity and her determination to ensure that future generations would have the chance to explore the stars in safety. Jake felt Elena's agony through their psychic link and tried to share her burden by sending his own strength and will through the connection. The other crew members throughout the ship felt drawn to contribute their own determination to the effort, and Elena realized that the weapon was becoming a focus point for everything good and hopeful about both human and Valian civilization. She was no longer just one person making a sacrifice, but was the living embodiment of countless individuals who had chosen courage over fear and hope over despair. The reality disruptor reached critical charge levels as the Prime Devourer began its final approach, and Elena prepared to fire the weapon at the cost of her own life, while knowing that failure would mean the extinction of everything she had ever cared about. The creature's presence filled her mind with visions of endless emptiness, but she held on to her memories of laughter and love, and the simple beauty of watching sunrise over Earth's mountains. Elena Rodriguez took aim at the heart of ultimate darkness and prepared to prove that even the smallest light could drive back the deepest shadow if it burned bright enough and refused to be extinguished. Elena fired the reality disruptor at the exact moment when the Prime Devourer was fully manifested in their dimension, and the weapon's beam tore through space in colors that had no names and should not have been possible to see. The energy struck the creature at its core, causing a chain reaction that rippled outward through multiple dimensions as the entity's death scream echoed across realities. Elena felt the weapon's power surge beyond all safety limits as her life force was consumed by energies that rewrote the laws of physics around them. The Prime Devourer began to collapse inward as its connection to the entropy dimension was severed, and the smaller devourers throughout the system simply vanished as their master's destruction pulled them back into the void from which they came. The victory came with a terrible price, as Elena's sacrifice created a permanent rift in space and time that threatened to tear apart the fabric of reality if it was not contained immediately. Captain Hammond ordered all ships to form a containment perimeter around the growing anomaly, while Marcus Chun and the Valian engineers worked frantically to stabilize the dimensional tier before it could expand beyond control. Elena's consciousness lingered for a few precious moments as her body was consumed by cosmic forces, and she used her remaining connection to the weapon to help guide the containment effort. Jake felt her presence fade through their psychic link, and he knew that the brave woman who had saved them all was finally at peace. The combined human and Valian fleet worked together to establish energy barriers around the reality rift using technology that neither species could have managed alone. The anomaly settled into a stable configuration that would serve as a permanent memorial to Elena's sacrifice, while also creating a barrier that would prevent future devourer incursions into their galaxy. Ambassador Zthri explained that the weapon's resonance would continue to echo through dimensional space, making their reality uninhabitable for the entropy creatures that had threatened to consume everything. Commander Davis coordinated the evacuation of surviving personnel from the battle zone while damage assessment teams surveyed the aftermath of humanity's first victory against a cosmic-level threat. The cost had been enormous, with dozens of ships lost and hundreds of crew members who had simply ceased to exist when touched by Devourer energy. However, Elena's sacrifice had saved billions of lives throughout the galaxy and proved that even young species like humanity could make a difference when faced with ultimate evil. Davis found himself filled with pride for his species despite the grief he felt for all those who had died to achieve this victory. Captain Hammond filed her final report with Earth Command, knowing that her career was over but feeling no regret about her decision to disobey orders and stand with the Valians against the Devourers. The response from headquarters surprised her as military leaders, who had initially condemned her actions, began to understand the true scope of what had been accomplished. Elena Rodriguez had become the first human to sacrifice herself for the protection of alien civilians, and her example would inspire future generations to see themselves as guardians of all life rather than just defenders of their own species. Jake Morrison compiled the complete record of the battle, ensuring that Elena's heroism would be remembered throughout history as an example of humanity's greatest strength. The ability to stand against impossible odds for the sake of others was something that even advanced species like the Valians found remarkable about humans. Jake included personal messages from crew members who had known Elena, as well as tactical analysis that would help future commanders understand how the victory had been achieved. He made sure that her name would be spoken with respect by children who had not yet been born. Ambassador Zthri worked with his people to begin the long process of rebuilding Valian civilization in star systems that had been abandoned centuries ago when the Devourers first appeared. The alliance with humanity had given his species something they had lost during their long flight from extinction: the courage to hope for a future that included growth rather than just survival. Valian colonies began to flourish again as the barriers created by Elena's sacrifice protected them from the cosmic horror that had defined their existence for so long. Marcus Chun analyzed the technical data from the reality disruptor and began developing new technologies based on the hybrid human and Valian systems that had made the weapon possible. The knowledge gained from Elena's sacrifice would revolutionize human understanding of physics and engineering, while also providing the foundation for defensive systems that could protect Earth and its colonies from future threats. Marcus made sure that every breakthrough was dedicated to the memory of the woman whose courage had made it all possible. Dr. Amy Foster established medical protocols for treating the psychological trauma experienced by personnel who had faced the Devourers and witnessed the breakdown of reality itself. Her research showed that humans recovered from cosmic horror more quickly than most species, because of their natural resilience and ability to find meaning in suffering. Foster's work became the basis for treatment programs that helped both humans and Valians process their experiences and return to productive lives. Despite having looked into the face of ultimate darkness, the memorial ceremony held at the newly constructed station above the reality rift drew representatives from dozens of species who had heard about humanity's victory over the Devourers. Elena Rodriguez was honored as a hero not just by humans but by civilizations throughout the galaxy, who understood that her sacrifice had protected them all from a threat that could have consumed everything. The memorial combined human and Valian artistic traditions, creating something beautiful from the union of two species who had faced extinction together and emerged stronger. Sarah Blake delivered the final speech at the ceremony, speaking about Elena's love for exploration and discovery that had driven her to study alien life and ultimately to give her life protecting it. She reminded the gathered representatives that Elena had chosen to see the Valians as people worth saving rather than aliens to be feared, and that her example should guide future relationships between species. The universe was vast and dangerous, but it was also filled with beings capable of courage and compassion when faced with ultimate tests. The story concluded with ships from across the galaxy arriving to pay their respects at the memorial station. while new colonies were established in systems that had been protected by Elena's sacrifice. Humanity had proven itself worthy of respect among the galactic community, not through conquest or technology, but through the willingness of one woman to give everything for the protection of others. The reality rift continued to pulse with gentle light that served as a reminder that even in a universe filled with darkness there would always be those brave enough to stand against it and create hope where none had existed before.